The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was staring at my phone, hoping my parents would walk through the hospital doors. They never did. Instead, I woke up alone with a voicemail that changed my family forever. If you've ever been treated like the disposable child while someone else could do no wrong, this story will probably hit closer to home than you'd expect. Subscribe if you enjoy revenge stories where patience wins, because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming someone they can never afford to lose. My name is Leah Montgomery. I'm 27 now, but this story really started when I was 12 years old. That was the year I realized my parents didn't have two daughters. They had one daughter and one backup. Emily, my older sister by 3 years, was the sun our family orbited around. She wasn't evil, not at first. She simply grew up in a house where every door opened for her before she even reached it. If she wanted dance lessons, my parents found the money. If I wanted to join the school art club, suddenly we couldn't afford the $30 fee. If Emily brought home a B, we'd celebrate with dinner at her favorite restaurant. When I came home with straight A's, Dad would barely glance up from the television. Good job. That was usually enough. Mom always had an explanation. Emily needs more encouragement. School is harder for her. Everything was harder for Emily. Everything deserved understanding. Everything deserved attention. Meanwhile, I learned something that would define most of my childhood. If I needed something, I became an inconvenience. By high school, I'd stopped asking. I got my first part-time job at 16 because I wanted my own clothes, not designer brands, just jeans that actually fit instead of Emily's hand-me-downs. Mom smiled proudly. See? Leah is so independent. Independent. Funny word. It usually means someone had no choice. College made everything clearer. Emily stayed close to home. She switched majors 4 times, dropped classes constantly. My parents paid every tuition bill without complaint. I earned a scholarship 3 states away when I called to tell them I'd been accepted. Dad actually asked, "So, does this mean Emily gets your bedroom?" I laughed. He wasn't joking. Life away from home was strangely peaceful. Nobody compared me to anyone. Nobody expected me to disappear into the background. I made friends, real friends, people who noticed when I wasn't smiling, people who asked if I was okay, and actually waited for the answer. That's where I met Nora. She became more family to me than anyone related by blood ever had. One night during sophomore year, after too much pizza and not enough sleep, she asked me something nobody had before. "Leah, why do you always apologize before asking for anything?" I blinked. "I don't." "You literally just apologized because you wanted another napkin." I stared at the table. She was right. I'd spent my entire life believing my existence created extra work for everyone else. That realization hurt more than I'd expected. After graduation, I moved back home for 8 months. Worst decision of my life. Emily had recently gotten engaged. You'd think a royal wedding was being planned. Every conversation, every weekend, every dollar. Everything revolved around her. Mom had spreadsheets taped to the refrigerator. Dad worked overtime to pay for the venue. Emily cried over flower colors like international peace depended on them. Meanwhile, I'd started having stomach pain. At first, I ignored it. Stress. Probably. Then it became constant, sharp, burning. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night curled into a ball on my bathroom floor trying not to scream. Mom noticed once. "You don't look well. I think I need to see a doctor." She looked toward the dining room where Emily was discussing invitation designs. "Can it wait until after dinner? Your sister's stressed." Everything could wait. Everything except Emily. The diagnosis came 2 weeks later. A large ovarian cyst, bigger than expected. The specialist explained that because of where it had grown, waiting much longer carried serious risks. They scheduled surgery within 3 weeks. I was terrified. I'd never had surgery before. The doctor explained possible complications, recovery time, anesthesia, bleeding. The words blurred together. The only thing I remember clearly was asking, "Can someone stay with me afterward?" The nurse smiled. "Hospital policy requires someone to pick you up." Of course, I had parents. Surely this would be the one time. That evening, I sat everyone down. Mom, Dad, Emily. "I need surgery." Silence. Emily finally spoke. "When?" I gave them the date. Nobody said anything for several seconds. Then Dad slowly rubbed his forehead. "Oh." Something about his tone made my stomach drop. Mom reached for the family calendar hanging on the wall. She flipped pages, stopped, looked at Dad, looked back at me. "Oh no." Emily suddenly gasped. "My wedding rehearsal?" The room went quiet again. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Dad sighed heavily. "Your surgery is the day before Emily's wedding." For a second, I honestly thought they were joking. I even smiled. Nobody smiled back. Mom bit her lip. "Could you reschedule?" I stared at her. The doctor said it shouldn't wait. Emily crossed her arms. "They schedule surgeries every day." "It's not elective." She shrugged. "I'm just saying. This wedding has been planned for 18 months. I looked around the room, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell Emily she was being ridiculous. Instead, Dad nodded. "Your mother has a point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, they're removing a tumor." "A cyst," Emily corrected. "It's different." The specialist had specifically said they couldn't rule out cancer until pathology testing. I reminded them. Mom sighed. "But they don't think it's cancer." "No. They're just checking." "Yes." "So." She spread her hands. "It'll probably be fine." Probably. Probably. That's what my life was apparently worth. Probably. The next morning, I called the surgeon myself. I asked whether delaying was safe. There was a long pause. Then he asked, "Did someone pressure you into asking?" I didn't answer. "You should not postpone." Those were his exact words. "You've already waited longer than ideal." So I kept the appointment. I assumed, naively, that my parents would work something out. Dad could attend the rehearsal. Mom could stay with me, or vice versa. Families compromise. That's what families do, right? I underestimated how little I mattered. A week before surgery, Mom sat beside me. "I've been thinking." I felt hopeful. "Finally. We'll pay for a private hospital shuttle." I frowned. "They won't release me alone." "I'm sure they'll make an exception." "They won't." She looked genuinely annoyed. "Leah." "What?" "This wedding is once in a lifetime." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process what she was saying. "My surgery could be too." She frowned. "Don't be dramatic." 3 days later, the hospital called to confirm who would be collecting me. I froze. I didn't know. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment for almost an hour staring at the wall. Then I called Nora. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" I hadn't even spoken. I burst into tears. She drove 4 hours without hesitation, took time off work, booked a cheap motel near the hospital, slept in an uncomfortable chair during my pre-op consultations. Not because she had to, because she loved me. It's funny how complete strangers can become family, while your own parents become strangers. The night before surgery, I made one last attempt. I called Dad. "I don't want to do this alone." His voice softened. For one brief second, I thought he'd finally choose me. Instead, he said, "You won't be alone. Nora will be there." I closed my eyes. "Dad, you know how important tomorrow is for Emily. What if something goes wrong?" Silence. Then, "It won't." "You don't know that." "I have faith." "Faith." not responsibility. Faith. Then he added the sentence I'll never forget for the rest of my life. If we miss your sister's wedding over something that ends up being routine, she'll never forgive us, I whispered. And if I die? He didn't answer. The line stayed silent for almost 10 seconds. Then, you're not going to die. Click. He hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended. That was the moment something inside me quietly broke. Not dramatically. Not with anger. With acceptance. Because for the first time in my life, I understood exactly where I ranked. Not second. Not last. I simply wasn't on the list at all. I barely slept that night. Hospitals have a strange smell. It's something between disinfectant and fear. The air always feels colder than it should, and every hallway echoes with footsteps that somehow sound both rushed and painfully slow. Nora picked me up from the motel before sunrise. Neither of us talked much. She kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other wrapped around a cup of gas station coffee she'd barely touched. Every few minutes she'd glance over at me. "You okay?" I lied every time. "I'm fine." Neither of us believed it. As we pulled into the hospital parking garage, my phone buzzed. For one irrational second, my heart leaped. Maybe Dad had changed his mind. Maybe Mom had finally realized how insane this whole situation was. Maybe they were downstairs already. Instead, it was a family group text. Emily had sent a picture of herself wearing her wedding dress. "First fitting complete. Tomorrow is finally here." Mom immediately replied, "You look absolutely perfect, sweetheart." Dad followed, "Can't wait to walk you down the aisle." Dozens of heart emojis, smiling faces, celebration. Not one person asked how I was feeling. Not one person remembered I was checking into surgery at that exact moment. I quietly muted the conversation. I wouldn't unmute it for almost 4 years. Checking into surgery is oddly impersonal. You sign forms. Confirm your birthday. Spell your last name. Initial paperwork explaining that yes, you understand you could die. It's strange. People think the scariest part is the operating room. It isn't. The scariest part is sitting alone in a thin hospital gown while everyone around you has someone holding their hand. An older woman sat across from me. Her husband rubbed her shoulders. A teenage boy joked nervously with both of his parents. A little girl clutched her mother's sweater while nurses prepared her IV. I looked beside me. Nora smiled. "I'm here." She was. But she wasn't supposed to be. She wasn't supposed to be the one signing emergency contact forms. She wasn't supposed to be memorizing my insurance information. She wasn't supposed to be explaining my allergies. My parents should have known all of that. Instead, Nora did. A nurse came over carrying a clipboard. "So," she smiled warmly. "Mom or Dad?" I hesitated. "My friend." The nurse looked around. "Oh." There was a tiny pause. Not judgment, just surprise. She handed Nora several forms. "If anything unexpected happens, we'll come to you." Unexpected. I hated that word. About 30 minutes before surgery, the surgeon came in. He pulled up my scans again. "We're still optimistic?" Optimistic. Another word I hated. "But because of the size and location." He paused carefully. "There's a possibility we'll need to remove more tissue than originally expected." I swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It could affect future fertility." The room became completely silent. I'd never even decided whether I wanted children. Suddenly, someone else might be making that decision for me. The surgeon waited. "Do you have any questions?" I did. Hundreds. Instead, the only one that escaped was, "How long until I wake up?" He smiled kindly. "A couple of hours." Then he squeezed my shoulder. "We'll take good care of you." Funny. Complete strangers kept making promises my own family never had. Just before they wheeled me toward the operating room, I looked at Nora. If something happens? She interrupted immediately. Nothing's happening. If something does? She grabbed my hand. I'll deal with it. You shouldn't have to. I know. She smiled through tears. But I will. I squeezed her fingers one last time before the doors closed between us. That was the last familiar face I saw before anesthesia. The lights above the operating table looked impossibly bright. Machines beeped steadily around me. Someone adjusted my blanket. Another nurse placed a warm hand against my shoulder. The anesthesiologist smiled. Think about somewhere peaceful. I closed my eyes. I tried to picture home, but every memory I had of home somehow hurt. Instead, I pictured the tiny apartment I'd rented after college. The first place I'd ever lived where nobody made me feel like I was in the way. Count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8. The world disappeared. When I woke up, everything hurt. Not sharp pain. Heavy pain. Like my body no longer belonged to me. The room felt blurry. Voices echoed somewhere nearby. I blinked until I could finally focus. The first thing I saw was an empty chair. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Empty. The nurse noticed I was awake. Welcome back. My throat burned. I whispered, My parents? She looked at the chart. I'm sorry. Then she smiled gently. Your friend has been here the whole time. Nora appeared a second later. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. She leaned over carefully. You scared me. What happened? The surgery took longer. My heart immediately raced. Why? She hesitated. They found internal bleeding. Everything inside me went cold. The surgeon arrived moments later. He explained everything slowly. The cyst had twisted. More damage than expected. They managed to save my ovary, but only barely. Another few days. Maybe another week. Things could have become much worse. I listened quietly, then asked the only question still floating around in my head. Did my parents call? The surgeon exchanged a glance with Nora. No. Later that evening, while Nora stepped out to get food, my phone buzzed again. I smiled despite myself. Maybe now. Maybe they finally knew. Maybe. Emily. Wedding rehearsal was perfect. You should see the flowers. Attached were 12 photos, centerpieces, bridesmaids, cake samples, the venue, the dance floor. Not one message asking whether I had survived surgery. Not one. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then another notification appeared. Mom. Hope everything went okay. We'll call after the honeymoon. After the honeymoon. Not tomorrow. Not tonight. Not when I got home. After. 3 weeks later. As if I'd had a dental cleaning. I turned my phone off. Not on silent. Off. Completely. Recovery was harder than anyone expected. The incision became infected. I developed a fever. Instead of going home after 2 days, I stayed nearly a week. Nora rearranged her entire life, worked remotely from my hospital room, argued with insurance representatives, brought me clean clothes, helped me walk laps around the ward when every step felt like broken glass inside my stomach. One afternoon I asked, Why are you doing all this? She laughed. What kind of question is that? You've already missed work. So? I'm not your responsibility. She stopped walking, then looked directly at me. No, she said softly. You're my family. I completely broke down, right there in the hallway. Not because of the pain, because nobody related to me had ever said those words before. 3 days after I came home, my parents finally called. Mom sounded cheerful. Everything went beautifully. For a second I thought she meant my surgery. She meant the wedding. The photographer got amazing pictures. Dad got on the phone. You should see Emily's dress. Neither one asked how I was healing, not until I interrupted. My incision got infected. Silence. Oh, Mom finally said. Well, are you taking antibiotics? Yes. Good. Then. So anyway, Hawaii was beautiful. I couldn't even speak. I simply listened while they described beaches, cocktails, sunsets. They spent 23 minutes talking about the honeymoon. 23 minutes. Before ending the call with, "We'll come visit when things settle down." They never did. That should have been the moment I cut them off. It wasn't. Children don't stop loving their parents because they're mistreated. They keep hoping. That's the tragedy. Hope survives long after logic dies. So I kept calling. Birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Every conversation sounded the same. Emily talked. Mom praised her. Dad laughed. I listened. Whenever I mentioned work, someone changed the subject. Whenever I mentioned my health, Emily had a more important story. I slowly learned to speak less. It was easier that way. About 8 months later, I got promoted at work. It was the biggest achievement of my career. I called Dad first. I got promoted. That's nice. Long pause. Then, did you hear Emily's pregnant? That was it. No congratulations, no questions, no celebration. Just another reminder that every milestone in my life existed only between chapters of hers. I congratulated Emily. Hung up. Sat in my apartment staring out the window for almost an hour. Then I quietly deleted the family group chat. No announcement, no dramatic message. Just delete. People think cutting contact is one big explosive decision. Sometimes, it's hundreds of tiny decisions. You stop calling first. You stop explaining yourself. You stop attending birthdays where nobody notices you're missing. You stop sending Christmas gifts. Eventually, the silence becomes permanent. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Not one person came looking for me. Not one. It hurt. But it also answered every question I'd spent my entire life asking. I hadn't abandoned them. They simply hadn't noticed I was gone. 3 years after my surgery, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning. The scar had faded into a thin silver line. I traced it gently with my fingers. For the first time. It didn't remind me of pain. It reminded me of survival. That scar had become proof of something much bigger. The day my parents chose Emily's wedding was also the day I unknowingly began building a life that no longer depended on their love. I just didn't realize yet. That life was about to place something in my hands they would desperately need. And when the phone finally rang, the voice on the other end was the last one I ever expected to hear. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers usually meant spam, recruiters, or someone trying to sell me an extended warranty for a car I didn't even own anymore. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 4 years. Leah? My stomach tightened instantly. Dad. He sounded older. Not just older, smaller. Like someone had slowly squeezed all the confidence out of him. I wasn't sure this was still your number. It is. Another silence. How have you been? It was such a ridiculous question that I almost laughed. 4 years. 4 birthdays. 4 Christmases. 4 years without a single attempt to visit me. And now he wanted small talk. I've been fine. I'm glad. His voice cracked. There was another pause. Then he finally admitted the real reason he'd called. We need to talk. No, you need to talk. There was a difference. I don't think there's anything left to say. Before he could answer, another voice came through the phone. My mother. Leah, please don't hang up. It was the first time I'd heard panic in her voice. Real panic. Not the manufactured kind she used whenever Emily forgot flowers or seating charts. This sounded genuine. What happened? Mom inhaled shakily. It's your father. I frowned. What about him? He, he's sick. I didn't say anything. She kept talking. The doctors found a tumor. Tumor. That word echoed inside my head in a way I couldn't explain. Memories flooded back. Hospital lights, consent forms, an empty chair beside my bed. Leah? I'm here. It's serious. I see. They're still doing tests. I hope everything works out. She waited, probably expecting more. Prayers, comfort, emotion. Instead, nothing. Because somewhere along the way, my sympathy had quietly burned itself out. Dad finally spoke again. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. That caught my attention. Not because I believed him, because it was the first honest sentence I'd ever heard him say. I've had a lot of time to think. I stayed silent. I wasn't a good father. No, you weren't. I should have been there. Yes. You deserved better. I looked out my apartment window as rain tapped softly against the glass. 4 years ago. Those words would have destroyed me. Now, they barely reached me. It wasn't hatred. Hatred requires energy. This was simply distance. I'm sorry. He whispered it, quietly, almost like he knew the apology had arrived years too late. I appreciate you saying that, Mom quickly interrupted. So, maybe we could meet? There it was. The real request. Not reconciliation, access. No. The answer surprised even me. It came so easily. No hesitation, no guilt. Just, no, they didn't give up. Over the next month, the calls kept coming. Voicemails, emails, letters, even birthday cards. Apparently my birthday had become important again. Funny. They'd forgotten it twice while I was growing up because Emily happened to have dance competitions the same weekends. Now suddenly I mattered. I ignored everything. Then Emily called. That shocked me. She'd never called unless she wanted something. Leah? She sounded exhausted. Not emotionally, physically, like someone who hadn't slept. Hi. I know you probably hate me. I don't. You don't? No. Another pause. I just don't know you anymore. She started crying. Real crying. Not the dramatic kind she'd mastered since childhood. I've been awful to you. I waited. I didn't realize. Her voice cracked. I honestly didn't realize how much they compared us. I closed my eyes. Emily. I'm serious. No. I am. You realized. Silence. You just benefited from it. That one sentence seemed to knock the air out of her. Because it was true. People who benefit from unfairness almost always notice it. They simply convince themselves it's normal. She confessed something I'd suspected for years. Mom and Dad always told me you didn't want to spend time with us. I frowned. What? They said you liked being alone. I almost laughed. They told me you were busy. They told me you thought we were boring. They said you hated family gatherings. Every sentence felt like another missing puzzle piece. No wonder she'd never questioned my absence. She'd been fed an entirely different story. I invited you to Lily's first birthday. I know. You never came. I never received an invitation. Silence. I mailed it. No. Mom had intercepted it. I knew she had. I could almost picture it. Opening the envelope, throwing it away, telling Emily. Leah never responded. It was exactly the kind of quiet manipulation she'd always excelled at. Not loud cruelty. Invisible cruelty. The kind that leaves no witnesses. I'm sorry, Emily whispered again. I really am. I believed her, which somehow made everything sadder, because forgiveness isn't the same thing as trust. I hope your family is doing well, she sniffled. They're not. What happened? My husband left. I hadn't expected that. He found out. She hesitated. I've been covering for Mom and Dad financially. That surprised me even more. What do you mean? They're broke. Broke? My parents? That didn't make sense. Dad had always earned good money. Their house was nearly paid off. Retirement accounts? Savings? Where had everything gone? Emily answered before I even asked. The wedding. What? My wedding. I frowned. That was years ago. I know. They refinanced the house. My heart sank. They borrowed against retirement. I closed my eyes. They took loans. More silence. Dad kept saying he'd pay everything back. But he lost his job 6 months later. Everything suddenly clicked. The desperation, the repeated phone calls, the apologies. This wasn't only guilt. This was survival. Over the next few weeks, bits of the truth continued to surface. Dad's company had downsized. Finding another executive position at his age had been almost impossible. The mortgage payments had become overwhelming. Credit card debt exploded. Medical bills followed. Then came the diagnosis. Life had finally stopped making exceptions for them. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, every crisis had somehow landed on my shoulders. Now, they were carrying their own. One evening, Nora came over with Chinese takeout. She noticed I was unusually quiet. They contacted you again? I nodded. What do they want? I don't know. She raised an eyebrow. You do. I sighed. They want their daughter back. No. She shook her head. They want the version of you they think still exists. What version? The one who keeps forgiving them. I stared at my untouched noodles. She wasn't wrong. A week later, I received another letter. This one wasn't from my parents. It was from the hospital where Dad was receiving treatment. At first, I thought it had been mailed by mistake. Then I saw the highlighted sentence, "Emergency contact, Leah Montgomery." I laughed, actually laughed, out loud, for almost an entire minute. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. After abandoning me before surgery, after disappearing for years, after pretending I didn't exist, I had somehow become their emergency contact, without asking, without permission, without even speaking to me. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately called the hospital. This is Leah Montgomery. Yes, Ms. Montgomery. I am not my father's emergency contact. Oh. The receptionist sounded confused. Would you like to update your information? No. I'd like you to remove my name entirely. Certainly. And please note that I am not responsible for medical decisions. Of course. She paused. Is there someone else we should contact? I thought for a moment. His wife. She gave me my mother's name. I confirmed it. Then added quietly, she's the one who chose not to attend my surgery. The receptionist didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I simply hung up. For the first time in years, I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness. Control. Real control. No screaming. No revenge speech. No dramatic confrontation. Just one simple phone call. One boundary. One decision. The kind my parents had denied me my entire childhood. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because my father was sick. I took no pleasure in that. I slept because I finally understood something. Revenge wasn't making them suffer. Life had already done that. The real revenge was refusing to sacrifice myself to rescue the people who had never once chosen me. And yet, I had no idea the biggest test was still ahead. Because 3 days later, another call came. This time, it wasn't from my parents. It was from a lawyer. And what he asked me would force me to make the one decision my family never believed I was capable of making. The lawyer introduced himself before I had a chance to ask who he was. My name is Richard Bennett. I represent your parents. I leaned back in my office chair and stared out the window. Outside, people hurried down the sidewalk carrying coffees, checking their phones, living ordinary Tuesday mornings. Meanwhile, the past had somehow found my number again. What do you need? There was a careful pause. I understand this is... A delicate situation. You do. I'll be direct. I'd appreciate that. He cleared his throat. Your father's treatment is becoming significantly more expensive than anticipated. I didn't answer. Your parents have exhausted most of their savings. Still nothing. They're preparing to sell their home. I closed my eyes. The house. The one where I'd spent years learning to stay quiet. The one where every family photo somehow positioned Emily in the center. The one where my bedroom had become a storage room less than a month after I left for college. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt strangely detached. Like someone was telling me about strangers. They were hoping, he hesitated, that you might be willing to help. There it was. Not an apology, not reconciliation, a transaction. What exactly are they asking for? They would like financial assistance. I almost laughed. Financial assistance. The daughter whose art club fee had been considered too expensive. The daughter who bought her own school clothes. The daughter who had paid every cent of her own education after earning scholarships. Now suddenly, I was financially important. How much? He told me the number. It was enough to wipe out nearly everything my parents had left. Not impossible for me, but significant. You seem surprised. I am. I understand you've been very successful. I frowned. How do you know that? Public records? Of course, I wasn't rich, but after leaving my hometown, I'd built a career in healthcare administration, years of hard work, late nights, professional certifications, promotions, investments, the kind of life nobody in my family had ever bothered asking about. Apparently, they'd researched me once they needed something. Interesting timing. I won't be sending money. He didn't sound surprised. I expected that answer. Then why call? Because your father insisted. I sighed. He believes if you hear one thing. What thing? The lawyer became very quiet. Then he read directly from his notes. Tell Leah I finally understand what it feels like to be afraid and alone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because I forgave him, because I remembered. The operating room, the empty chair, my phone. If I die? His silence, his certainty. You're not going to die. Click. Now. He finally knew. Fear, loneliness, uncertainty. Everything I'd begged him to share with me. Everything he'd chosen not to. Life had delivered the lesson I never could. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony with Nora. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky shades of orange and gold. She listened quietly as I told her everything. So, she asked carefully, what are you going to do? I already decided. You won't help. I won't give them money. She nodded slowly. Do you feel guilty? I thought about it. Longer than I expected. No. She smiled. You know why? I looked at her. Because if the situations were reversed. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I already knew. They'd answered that question years ago. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was handwritten. Dad's handwriting had changed. The letters trembled slightly. Some lines drifted downward. Illness had reached even his pen. Leah, I'm writing because I know I no longer have the right to ask anything from you. I have replayed your surgery in my head every day since my diagnosis. Every hospital hallway reminds me of the one I should have walked through for you. Every night I wonder if you were as scared as I am now. I know the answer is yes. The difference is, you were 23, and you were alone because I chose someone else. I stopped reading. Not because I was angry, because I was crying. Not for the father I had, for the father I never got. The man writing this letter, he finally understood. Years too late. But genuinely. Sometimes accountability arrives after there's nothing left to repair. I finished the letter. Near the bottom he had written one sentence that stayed with me forever. I spent my whole life believing love could wait until tomorrow. I didn't realize tomorrow eventually runs out. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, then stored it in a drawer, not as forgiveness, as evidence. People can change. Sometimes. The tragedy is that change doesn't erase consequences. 3 months later, Dad died. Mom called me herself. She didn't cry immediately. She sounded exhausted. He wanted you at the funeral. I looked at the calendar on my desk. I won't be coming. I understand. That surprised me. No argument, no guilt, nothing. Just, I understand. Before hanging up, she quietly said something I'd never expected. You were always the stronger one. For years, I'd wanted to hear words like that. Recognition, validation, pride. Instead, I simply answered, I had to be. Then I ended the call. I didn't attend the funeral. Instead, I drove to a quiet lake about an hour outside the city. I sat on a wooden bench watching the water ripple in the wind. I thought about little Leah, the little girl who waited by windows, who celebrated birthdays with hand-me-down decorations because Emily's parties always came first, who apologized before asking for a glass of juice, who believed love had to be earned. I wished I could tell her something. None of it was her fault. She had never been difficult, never been needy, never been less worthy. She had simply been born into a family that confused favoritism with love. Several weeks passed. Then Emily called again. I wanted you to know something. What is it? I found Dad's journals. Apparently, during chemotherapy, he'd written almost every day, mostly regrets, stories from childhood, things he'd remembered too late. Emily laughed softly through tears. You know what he wrote about the most? What? You. I frowned. He kept writing that he'd spent years trying to impress the daughter who needed nothing, while ignoring the daughter who needed everything. Neither of us spoke. He said he didn't lose you when you stopped answering the phone, Emily whispered. He lost you the day he didn't walk into that hospital. A month later, the house sold. Emily divided what little remained after debts were paid. I received paperwork from the attorney informing me I was entitled to a portion of the estate. It wasn't much, barely enough to matter. I signed one document, then mailed the entire inheritance to a local foundation that helps patients who have to travel alone for surgery. The note simply read, "For the people still waiting for someone who never comes." I never put my name on it. I didn't need credit. Helping strangers heal felt far more meaningful than holding on to money that carried so much pain. About 6 months after that, I received one final letter. This one was from my mother. Unlike Dad's, it was short. Very short. Leah, I spent years believing I was protecting our family by always choosing the loudest person in the room. I didn't realize the quiet child eventually stopped asking to be heard. I hope your life is peaceful now. I won't contact you again. Mom. She kept that promise. I never heard from her again. People sometimes ask whether I regret never reconciling with my parents. The honest answer is no, because reconciliation requires two people willing to build something new. My parents waited until life punished them before they admitted what they'd done. That isn't redemption. It's realization. Those are different things. I accepted their apologies. Quietly. Privately. But acceptance isn't the same as giving someone access to your life again. Some doors close without hatred. They simply close because you finally learned which side is safe. Today, the scar from my surgery is almost invisible. You have to know exactly where to look. Sometimes, after a shower, I'll catch it in the mirror. I don't see abandonment anymore. I don't see betrayal. I don't even see revenge. I see proof. Proof that the worst day of my life became the first day of the rest of it. My parents thought choosing my sister's wedding would only hurt me for one weekend. They never understood that a single decision can echo for decades. The last time I ever spoke to my father, he said he finally understood what it meant to be alone. I believed him, because I had spent years teaching myself how to survive that feeling. The difference was, I built a beautiful life afterward. He only recognized its cost when it was too late. And in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't making my family suffer. It was refusing to abandon myself ever again. If this story has any lesson, it's this. The people who repeatedly choose someone else over you will often expect your loyalty long after they've forfeited the right to ask for it. Forgiveness is a gift. Access is a privilege. And sometimes the healthiest sentence you'll ever say is the simplest one. No. Because protecting your peace isn't revenge. It's finally choosing yourself. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. Would you have answered that first phone call? Or would you have walked away forever? And if you enjoy stories where justice comes not through anger, but through quiet strength and hard-earned boundaries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next story. Sometimes the most unforgettable revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's showing them they no longer have the power to hurt you at all.